Christopher Hitchens, author of all the little articles in the new book called For the Sake of Argument. You've got a section in there called Rogues Gallery. Was that your idea?
Yes.
Why create a Rogues Gallery?
For a lot of people, their first love is what they'll always remember. For me, it's always been the first hate. And I think that hatred, though it provides often rather junky energy, is a terrific way of getting you out of bed in the morning, keeping you going. It can be, if you don't let it get out of hand, it can be canalized into writing. And in this country where people like to be non-judgmental when they can be, which translates as, on the whole, lenient, there are an awful lot of bubble reputations floating around that, you know, one wouldn't be doing one's job if one didn't itch to prick. So,
let me mention one right away, because
yes.
A couple of months ago, back during the Bush administration, in some article I remember popping up a paragraph that said, Dan Quayle's favorite book that he's reading is, I think it was called The Modern Society by Paul Johnson.
Modern Times by Paul Johnson,
Modern
yes.
Times by Paul Johnson. You have Paul Johnson in your Rogues Gallery. Who is he?
Let me just say about that very point. Modern Times and Paul Johnson, the terrible reactionary British historian, pseudo-historian I'd say, he used to be the Christmas gift of Richard Nixon. He, in the Quayle and Bush era, became a cult figure on the right, and there's a wonderful description in Peggy Noonan's book of walking past Quayle's office and seeing Modern Times portentously open at a certain page. You know, Quayle's reading this book, and walking past it several weeks later and seeing it was still open at the same page. He's a cult on the American right. He used to be my editor at a British leftist liberal magazine called The New Statesman, once a very famous weekly review where we both worked, and he's probably the classic instance of the guy who, having lost his faith, believes that he's found his reason. In other words, a defector. And he's become a very farouche Thatcherite figure. And he wrote a terrible book called Intellectuals, which I decided I would unload upon.
And at some point in this piece that you have, and this is a book of all kinds of pieces you've written for a lot of different publications, I don't know where it is, you say sorry about that, Paul, I think. Is it hard to punch at somebody you know or used to work for?
It can be harder, yes. And George Orwell used to say, I won't have lunch with X or Y because I'm going to write about him soon, and I'm sure I'm going to find he's really quite nice. And therefore I don't want the corrupting effect of a sort of acquaintanceship or friendship. I'd rather keep clean and keep pure. I.F. Stone in Washington used to do the same thing. He wouldn't go to briefings and little soirees because he wanted to be able to say what he thought about people. I'm not that fortunate. I'm compulsively social. But with Johnson, I had to say, look, in your book Intellectuals, you have said that certain people, mainly liberal and radical intellectuals, can be defamed, grossly defamed actually in his book, on the grounds that their private life wasn't exemplary. Well, Paul, use of the first name, I know you, and I think it's unwise of you to make the private life the measure of anything.
Yeah, like for instance, you say that this often involved drunken and boorish conduct towards women, including his wife. This is up front in this piece.
Yeah, no, I had to say, look, I don't think this kind of stuff counts. If I was writing about Voltaire, would not go and look in his linen basket in order to attack his ideas. But if you're going to do it, then you become a hostage to it yourself. And so the first part of the piece is supposed really to be a lampoon. I say, if I was doing Johnson as a political figure, and if I was Johnson doing it, I'd do it like this, just to show him how it feels. Then I hope successfully, I make a transition in the rest of the article and say, actually, that's all for show, that's not the point. The problem with Johnson's theory about Noam Chomsky, who attacks revoltingly, about Voltaire, about Marx, about other great figures of the modern world, can and should be attacked in other ways. And I don't know what the American equivalent of this is exactly, but in England there's a motto, a sort of schoolboy type morality motto, which says that you tackle the ball and not the man.
This book has a picture, black and white picture on the cover of you, sitting there with a cigarette in your hand. And I can't see where I am. Is that alcohol there in front of you?
There are about 9 or 10 empty glasses in front of me. Only 2 or 3 of them are mine. I hope it's clear. And I think only probably about 2 of them are filled or have just been emptied of booze. It's me slumped over a dinner table the night I got married, as a matter of fact. And Annie Leibovitz was there and took a picture of me, which I thought did actually look, for better or worse, pretty much like I do.
Let's take a look at it again. This your idea to put this on the cover?
Well, partly it was because not everyone has the chance to have their picture taken by Annie Leibovitz, and second, because she is a genius photographer and she does capture what I'm like after about 8 o'clock in the evening. And third is that one of the longer articles in the book is a defense of smoking and drinking and of alcohol and nicotine against the current sort of prohibitionist mentality that's sweeping the country. It's a sort of in-your-face reply to the new Puritanism.
That expression on your face.
I'm sitting here now, for example, thinking how much I like these sorts of discussion and thinking, but if I just had a brandy and soda there and an ashtray, how much better a side of me you'd be seeing.
You think that's you?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I have to face it. Like everyone else. I keep mentioning Orwell, but he says I think he says at the age of 40, a man has the face he deserves. I won't see 40 again, so I guess I'm stuck with that now.
The purpose of a book like this?
Well, I wrote it as a reply. I mean, the pieces are very various. That's what I think anyway. They're a salad. But they have a common theme, which is it's a reply to all those who say that since the 1989 revolution, that there's really no need for the left critique of society or politics anymore. That we've moved beyond all that. That society is just basically a liberal problem-solving matter and no more. Though the Conservatives, I notice, are still allowed to have their say. Implicitly, everything in there is about the origins of the 1989 revolution in Eastern Europe, which I covered in some part, and its consequences. And I define it as a real emancipating revolution that I'd long hoped for and worked for and supported, but one that by no means makes politics any more one-dimensional. I mean, I think actually it restores the left as a very necessary part of the political argument. So even when I'm writing about something else, I'm always trying to bear that in mind.
And the articles come from places like a magazine called The Nation.
Sure.
If someone's never read The Nation, what is it?
The Nation is America's oldest political weekly magazine. It was founded in 1865, towards the end of the Civil War, by a group of abolitionists, and it's basically upheld the liberal left end of the spectrum, held up that end of the rope ever since. And still proudly comes out every week, and every other week it features, and has for the last 10 years, a column by me called Minority Report, which sometimes about politics, sometimes about a new book, sometimes about a personality, but is, again, an attempt to mount a left critique of society and politics.
There are other publications like Times Literary Supplement. What Times?
The London Times. The TLS, as it's called, the Times Literary Supplement, sells independently as a weekly, and actually half its subscribers are in the United States. And I used to be its American columnist. And in there I've written about more general subjects like the work of Graham Greene, or P.G. Wodehouse is perhaps my favorite author, and a couple of other more literary pieces. But again, in there, I try, put it like this, I try when I'm writing about literature not to leave the political dimension out. And when I'm writing about politics, I try and recall that politics isn't all there is to life, and try and import what you might call cultural or literary or aesthetic points to it. This must make me sound insufferable, but I mean, that's my ambition anyway.
Isn't P.G. Wodehouse's another person that writes about him all the time is George Will?
Yes, I mean, you get into terrifically bad company some of the time if you're a fan of Wodehouse. That's actually true. That's true of also being a fan of Kipling or Orwell or many other people. P.G. Wodehouse is the author of the most imperishable, I think, double act in fictional history. That's Bertie Wooster and his manservant Jeeves. And it's impossible. I mean, of course, a joke is never a joke if it has to be explained. But to those who haven't found and discovered and immersed themselves in this, I can only say they should start today. And the other,
when were you first?
It sounds a bit cultish, but those who've already done it will already know what I'm talking about.
Who is he?
He died at the age of about 93 in the mid-70s. He was an English comic writer who, as a matter of fact, got driven out of England, rather, partly by poverty, and moved to America, which he adored, and stayed for the last 50 or so years of his life on Long Island. But he was always writing about the sort of mythical golden past of the English country house and of the English gentleman of leisure and man about town in London, Bertie Wooster, who's a complete chinless idiot and can't get himself out of any scrape of any sort without the help of his amazingly impassive, brilliant, classically educated, as he's called in the stories, personal gentleman's gentleman, the Butler Jeeves. who's always rescuing him. It's not unlike the importance of being earnest. These are guys who would be nowhere without their servants, and are always getting involved in ridiculous love affairs that have to be explained to them, and they have to be hauled out of and stood up on their feet again.